Is this better? Okay, good. Good morning. My name is Michiel Thijsling, working for the same company as Eric. Having standards has an advantage. Everybody can apply it. You leverage good practices. But is it not like the Spanish flu? If there's one thing that all of a sudden pops up, everybody is vulnerable for the same thing. So is one of the standards maybe to push for a bit diversity so that our immune system is better trained and more diverse?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, peril, any of us that are familiar with using, everybody uses the same operating system. I won't mention my name, but since we're non-commercial here, but that gives everyone a common form of risk. The way standards address that really is to, as much as possible, to the largest extent possible, is to focus on the what and not the how. So the standard sets the standard, or sets standards and measurable standards and metrics for what needs to be accomplished without specifying how it gets done and how those measures are achieved. And I think it's through the how that you get the diversity.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about different types of standards. There's certainly technical standards, but we also have broader management and operational standards. So, if you look at the standards that we create for federal departments and agencies, it ranges from the very technical to key encryption, how to apply application whitelisting, and then, of course, some of our encryption standards. But then we have much broader guidance on how to conduct a risk assessment, and some of the concepts in the framework really go to how do you have that conversation with your senior management. So there's a lot of flexibility in the approach and how you can implement a lot of these standards, as Eric was saying. And a lot of it's just getting the culture, getting the mindset right, and how to manage the risk.
Adam, you mentioned that NIST was getting involved in doing some laboratory testing of cybersecurity. How does this differ from some of the programs that INL and some other laboratories, have?
So I think the main difference, and we certainly work with INL and a lot of those other groups, is the way that we see this laboratory is, first of all, it's very consistent with the Department of Commerce and NIST's activities in working with industry. And so a lot of those laboratories have their individual mission. We see this laboratory, I mean, the way that the NIST director talks about NIST overall is to be industry's laboratory. So all of the work that we're doing, we seek it for the benefit of industry. And so I think what we think is different and unique about this one is that we've actually gone out and we've signed CRADAs with 19 different technology providers. So they're coming in with their technologies, with their people, and because what we're seeing is a lot of times the challenges that people are facing are you have these good technologies, how do you implement them together in a way that provides that secure platform? A lot of times, a lot of the vulnerabilities are in how those systems interplay and work together. So we think by doing this, we can provide some pretty novel solutions, and the idea is to really come up with things that can be put into practice immediately. So we're looking both at particular business needs based on sectors. So we have projects in the financial sector relating to asset management. We have projects in the electric sector where we're going to be working with the retail sector. But then once we have those projects, we'll look at how do you work with the technology providers to build those solutions. So for example, with healthcare, we're looking at health IT. You have some pretty unique requirements relating to encrypting data. And that includes down to, which is very difficult for people to implement, especially in these situations that will be literally life or death. So instead of dealing with these security requirements through HIPAA, you hear anecdotes of people just taking a picture of the patient's chart on their phone and texting it over to the doctor or the other nurse, which sort of bypasses all the requirements that exist. So instead, I think we want to figure out how do you use the products that you have to rely on and show kind of easier guides on how to build these together in a way to do it.
Move forward and adopt the latest standards for ISA secure embedded device security assurance. Level 2 pushes us towards encryption, and as vendors that presents us with a challenge for exporting to the likes of China. How are you approaching that for the future?
Okay, that's pretty deep. That's kind of I'm not that familiar with level 2 and levels of insurance. Is your question that...
It's mainly about encryption in general.
Right.
As we've been pushed by the standards to employ encryption,
Right.
I mean, in the last 72 hours, the Chinese government have asked both the UK and American governments to give them backdoors into encryption under the terrorism approach.
Right. And there's different... And they have their own sorts of encryption algorithms that they want to see deployed.
And then we have export issues as well, going
Yeah.
from the United States over. So
Yeah, I mean, well, we work with the Chinese and other governments both from a security and a trade perspective. And I think sending the message that we need to have things that could be implemented and deployed globally, that's something that we're working on quite a bit.
okay, thank you.
But so we do realize it's a challenge, and it's something we work on with our partners. That's one of the benefits of being in the Commerce Department. We can go down the hall and talk to our trade folks and figure out and work together on some of these challenges.
Thank you. Thomas Steckenreiter from Bayer. I have one question. Okay, let me explain one thing. That helps a lot. We work also on company internal standards to improve our whole cybersecurity environment, especially in the production. But we have introduced a program, for example, such a vulnerability audit on production assets. And we have seen that the biggest problem is still, what a surprise, the people that we... Yeah. And we have not the right solution today, but we are thinking about what we can do with people, like awareness programs, what we can do, that they understand better which mistakes they can make really to open a production environment to an attack from outside. And I think here we have to do a lot. Are there some activities ongoing regarding the behavior, regarding cybersecurity, regarding security in the production environment?
I can take one quick shot at that, and I'm sure others have comments on it too. We talk about standards, and sometimes it's very tempting to think of standards as just technical standards. Standards, as Adam and others have pointed out, address much more than just technology. So in the standards development space, whether you're looking at the 27000 series for generic IT, or whether you're looking at the 62443 series specifically focused on control systems, they are built very much around the three essential elements of any program, which is people, process, and technology. And so of the 62443 series that I'm most familiar with, we have an entire subset of the series that talks about the program, the people, the behaviors, and all of the rest of that. And then, of course, the standards set what's minimally acceptable, and then you have to leave it to others to come along with the training, the coaching, the communication, the program, auditing, all of the rest of that to make sure that those baselines are communicated and people's behavior is verified.
Also, Thomas, on the second panel after the break, we have...
We're talking about the mission critical operations training that we offer through ISA and through the Automation Federation. So we are addressing that issue, and you'll hear more about it at the second panel.
We also have a program at NIST called the National Institute for Cybersecurity Education, and that was supposed to look at both the education and the training side. So they spent a lot of time coming up with another framework on workforce that looked at the sort of skills that people need for different parts. There's no one type of security professional range, and then thinking about specific training for those different officials, and then on a broader scale than some of the work that we have with cybersecurity awareness with the Department of Homeland Security. Because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is really we tend to think about it from an organizational perspective, but at the end of the day, that sort of broad-based education. Some of the work we're doing, it's interesting. A lot of the bigger institutions will say, we're okay to talk to the small and mediums, and we talk to the small and mediums, and they're saying, we're pretty good, but we interface with the end user all the time, and they can't seem to understand the things that we're telling them to do about changing their password. And then sometimes we get penalized by asking them to do things that will enhance their security. They will just walk away and go somewhere else. So I think those, thinking about how all those elements work together, I think is very important. And I think that will be actually one of the focuses that we'll look at kind of across the government on Friday in California. I think we'll see a lot of those different stakeholders sitting together and figuring out what we should be focusing on moving forward.
And we also have the cybersecurity competency model that can be used to kind of look at and see what kinds of training your operational folks need in order to be aware of the risk and how to mitigate it.
Andy's giving me the hook, but he's also saying, we've got some good questions, so let's postpone the break and keep the Q&A going. Yes, that's fine. Yeah. And there are, for people that are sitting in the back, John Wasson mentioned too, there are some empty seats up front here.
While we're waiting for a question, let me make one quick comment on this last one. Substitute safety for security and ask people who's responsible for your security. You are. Your cybersecurity. Who's involved? It's not just the experts. Everybody has to be engaged. Because as this gentleman's pointed out, the old cliche, you're only as good as your weakest link. So it's really awareness, and I think we really, in the industrial community particularly, we have a tremendous opportunity to learn from safety. Yeah, the question, if you didn't hear, the question was to elaborate a little bit on the intersection of safety and security. Particularly with regards to industrial security, there is a very strong affinity with safety. What's going on in that area? Our committee, the 99 committee, has a very active liaison with the ISA 84 committee, as I mentioned, in process safety. And we're also working with other groups in this general area. As a matter of fact, the ISA 84 committee is their working group 10 has published a technical report on the subject of safety and security, and then ISA 99 has developed the sort of complementary view, security and safety, and by bringing those and some emerging work out of IEC together, we hope that we're going to get all of the best minds from the safety and security community to come together and say, how do these actually work? So for example, and I'm going to keep this brief, but if you're safety knowledgeable, you have safety integrity levels in automation systems. We have security levels in the security system, levels of security in the standards. So the logical question is, what do I do at each logical intersection of those levels? 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, so forth. If you draw it in a simple matrix, what's the appropriate response for each combination, each possible combination of safety and security? And that's a very active area of development in the standards right now. Does that answer your question?
Two questions, and absolutely related. The first, you'll be familiar with from the chemical industry. What failure rate is acceptable? In sterilization, it may be 10 to the 6, it may be 6 logs or 12 logs. Pharmaceuticals, 15. And
the exposure on the result of that. You look around the room today, there are 98,000 facilities in the United States today for just water and wastewater. Over 92,000 of those have no IT connection except by contract and funding. They're not aware of the discussion today, and they represent in excess of 200 million people and service them. The numbers don't add up for the approach. How do we reach those and failure rate?
Want to talk about the reach part?
Yeah. So it reminds me, I was in the net with emergency manager from the state of Rhode Island, and she was talking about water and how they realized that they had no, but then they realized that if an incident were to occur that contaminated the water, they'd have no way to communicate that. So, right. So, yeah. So, I actually think that, I mean, I guess I would disagree. I think the thing that you're pointing out is the reason why the approach makes sense, because it is baked into doing awareness to reach different communities and different audiences. And so, in each of these sectors, we are continuing our work. Some of these sectors are very familiar with what happens at the federal level and how to engage. But others, it's a new world, and they have to consider new relationships, and they have to consider how do they get this information, and what are the questions that they ask themselves in their supply chain. So, what we have been doing is not only having these workshops, but being mindful of trying to get in front of new audiences that normally don't consider this, don't consider that they have a role in cybersecurity, and that this is a risk that they have to manage. So it's a really important thing, and a lot of it is not just having these conversations between government officials and industry, but making sure that industry have the resources, because oftentimes those conversations are a lot better without government in the room. So my sense is the approach we've taken, which is voluntary, which is built into international standards, which is a partnership, is one that scales much more broadly and much more widely than anything else, because we're basically, we're not telling anyone that they shouldn't participate. We're saying that everyone needs to participate and have that conversation.
My question is more as how do you scale it down, not scale it up. Scale it up, the system is certainly well addressed to. We're scaling it down to the level of one operator who protects and serves between 5 and 50,000 people and is connected to the internet. Yeah. Security is a nuisance. Right. How do we reach them?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and I'm not sure I have an answer for you, but I do want to touch on the point you made, and that is, you mentioned probability of failure. Just to let you know, in the committee, when we started working on this concept of security levels, we became very enamored with the parallel to, and took the approach for a while until we came to the conclusion that in the area of cybersecurity, it doesn't really apply, because it's not a statistical probability that you're talking about. As a matter of fact, some people will tell you that the statistical probability of you being attacked is 1. It is going to happen. So rather than take that approach that the safety community has taken, which is very appropriate for safety since we're talking about physics and science and failures, the security community has taken much more a consequences-based approach and look at consequences, the risk being the product of threat, vulnerability, and consequence. The asset owner is best positioned to assess consequence and then build your program based on that potential consequence. Now, to your point, in order to get them to do that, you first have to work on the awareness, right, and engagement. And it's like I said, as I started in my comments, I don't have a good, simple answer to that, but definitely reaching out. And I will mention, by the way, I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning, I won't mention his name, but one of the leading pundits, if you will, and minds in this cybersecurity area for industrial control systems actually works in the water business. So he's definitely one of the thought leaders in this area.
Just a side note to your question. Automation Federation over the past couple of years has started a liaison with the National Rural Water Association, and these are people that, the very people that you're talking about. So we're reaching out to them now as a first step anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat what anyone else has said, but you know, we are working with all different parts of the ecosystem, including the state and local, and the people that have a better relationship with what matters to that particular community. And I think there are still ways to have those conversations in a way that's meaningful, even for that institution where you might be relying on one person.
So it's funny you pushed the microphone away because it's going to come right back at you. So I mean, it's good that you mentioned the layers of protection on the safety side, because we all recognize that, and we recognize that it's a license to operate. But that's not the case in this. So I'm going to say there's a level of procrastination that, you know, I think I got what's good enough. And so if you read the websites on that, they'll say there has to be more intrusion, more hacking before people really react to cover all the layers that we have on security, unless there's a license to operate.
Is that the question?
So I mean, yeah. What would you say to something like that?
I mean, I don't know.
How do you handle procrastination? I guess.
Oh well. Yeah, I'll have to ask my mom. So I think that, look, I think that there's a more attuned awareness to this issue in industry certainly than there has been before, and part of that is likely to due to some of the incidents, some of the mega breaches that we're still aware of, and I think there are probably a lot of companies that or organizations that think they're in a better place than they are because of the amount of money that they're spending on this without the tools to really evaluate what it means to their organization. So, you know, and I think we have had some, I think because of that and because of the increasing dependencies that people have on one another because of the internet and IT, we're actually able to have richer conversations than I think we have in the past. If you looked at some of our workshops, it was relatively unique to get, well, we can ask Eric or others that have been there, but from my perspective, it was relatively unique to get such a diverse group of stakeholders in the room. And so you had people from, you know, the financial sector saying, you know, I'm relying on you, the telecom sector, and I'm not sure what you're doing. And you have the telecom sector saying, well, I'm relying on the products that I get from the IT sector, and I'm not really aware what they're doing. And then everyone points to the government and says, you guys aren't clear and consistent. We're never aware what you're doing or what's coming down the pike. So I think the ability to have those sorts of conversations and the ability to better measure and communicate the strength of your cybersecurity program, I think will have the impact of sort of lifting all boats. And so there has been, perhaps there has been a level of procrastination, but a lot of the folks that we work with in industry are very aware, and they're very much looking to figure out what is the best way that they can solve or better manage this problem. And I think, you know, we will continue to do things that we can do to raise awareness. I mean, certainly having things like the president give a pretty prominent address on cybersecurity, and that's certainly something that wasn't happening 10 years ago. Or, you know, there's about 3 congressional hearings a week on cybersecurity. You know, my boss was at one last week. So we're open for ideas, and especially to the earlier question of how do we best get in front of those audiences that perhaps we that aren't accustomed to coming to cybersecurity conferences, that don't think that they have a role. So we're very open to those ideas, and also presenting this in a material that can really be picked up by the market and then deployed more widely.
So, my name is Ed Crawford with Chevron, and this is a question for Adam. You made note of a cybersecurity center of excellence with 19 product suppliers supplying for you, and what's interesting to me is the secure use cases you mentioned. Is there an intent or an idea there that, and we're very interested in models for secure use cases, would there also be an ancillary report issued with that that would show, in general, if this wasn't these particular vendors, where the security items were put in those use cases, and could that be mapped to the cybersecurity framework as part of that report?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what we're trying to do. So, yeah, so I think the idea is you have these products, and we wouldn't be talking about those products specifically. We were talking about products that had those attributes. So you wouldn't be limited to the companies that we're working with directly. And we are already mapping a lot of the work to the cybersecurity framework, right? The framework's 41 pages. It's going to be at a relatively high level. But it talks a lot about the outcomes that you should seek to achieve in your security program. And so I think our next phase of this effort is to then build out additional reference material. So when you pick up the framework and you say, this is useful, this is interesting, but I really need something more in depth so that I can understand how to work it in my environment. So we can work with the folks on this table, but also we're hoping that what will come out of the NCCOE effort, and we already have a few examples of that, are those more technical guides to show how you can use these products with these attributes together within your organization.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sid Snitkin from ARC, Advisory Group, and I'll probably be attacked by people, I don't know, but in regard to some of the comments here, one thing I see in my research, I follow cybersecurity at ARC, is this issue of people just not doing. It's not the issue of not having standards, it's not the issue of not having products, knowing what to do, it's getting companies to do it, which I think has been expressed here quite a bit. I'm just wondering, because one industry, is the power industry with NERC SIP, and I know that's why I said maybe I'll get attacked by people, in the sense that I don't understand sometimes. When I talk to companies and people involved in NERC SIP, they're forced to do certain things. Now, they complain about it, but the issue in the end is they're forced to do something. And, there's also an issue of whether that's really securing them or not, because some of it is compliance issues. But at least there's regulations that say you have to do certain things. I just wonder why, like in the water systems, for example, people don't want to do that. I mean, I understand why they may not want to. I'm just surprised that there's not more from the government to push that, or I'm asking why there isn't. Because I do see it seems to be effective to get people to do something. Be it the right thing or not, I don't know. But again, there's a lot of regulations. People complain about them. It adds some cost. But it does get people to do it. And as an American, as a consumer, or citizen, I don't want to worry about my water system. I don't, I'm happy that they have it in power because I don't worry about power as much as maybe I should or could. I certainly don't want to do that with water, and when I hear people talk about water systems are completely open and you might have infected, or things that change the security of the water, the safety of the water, I just wonder why we're so reluctant to actually push that. So again, like I said, I don't know how many people in the room would go with me with standards or regulations. I just think that I'm wondering why we don't do more.
So, yeah, so there are folks smarter than me on the water sector, but I know that there is a role of regulation with the water sector with EPA, and I know EPA has worked with a large water sector organization to show guidance to. There was an organization that developed some additional guidance using the framework that was particular to the water sector. So, and EPA is very interested in monitoring that. But I think, the response to your question is the regulatory agencies are involved. There is as I mentioned earlier, we worked with those regulatory agencies, but what we said is, please come to our workshops, share what your expectations are, and then make sure that there's a clear understanding of what those are so that when we're building the framework, it can be consistent with that. I think, my response to your question would be, again, it's sort of a question of scale and the ability to develop solutions that can transcend sectors, types of organizations, and international boundaries. So we are very much interested in working with regulators and regulated entities and understanding how this is something that can be picked up in the marketplace and used. But there's an inherent market interest here. Generally, regulators only step in if there's evidence of market failure, but I don't think many organizations like having these incidents. I don't think they like it when they occur. So really our focus is to work with them to help manage the risk, because it's not something where there is an inherent interest of all these organizations.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks to the first panel. We've actually gone through the break, but we're still going to break. So I'd ask you 10 minutes. Please come back. We have 5 people that have traveled a long way and have some very interesting information for you. 10-minute break. Come on back. Thanks to the panel.